I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. My topic today is how to have a better argument. If you're interpreting that as how to have a better argument than your opponent, you've already lost. Not at the debate, silly. At life. Because what's the purpose of life other than to keep learning? So once you've decided that you will not change your mind, you've lost at what's really important. I think that argument gets a bad reputation because it's been turned into this idea of debate as a game, as a way of being able to blast your opponent. And that's ridiculous. That wasn't the purpose of debate when it was first invented, but first utilized and systematized by the Greeks. At that time, there was a sense of, we are going on this quest. We are going to pursue this question, and there are ways to do a true argument, and then there are ways to do a false argument, and those were called rhetorical fallacies. So this is something that I'm going to put out there, that when you change your mind, you've won the debate because you've gotten something out of it. But I've decided that I can't really learn from anyone who doesn't feel that they have anything to learn from me. So I think that when you change your mind, you're changing your minds together, and in that case, you both win. So this is going to go through the steps that I developed from my episode, The Dogma of Atheism, on how you can turn any argument that you are in or considering into a more productive one that actually has that sense of being able to come to the quest of a common answer, something that is further along the road than either of you were before. Argument also gets a bad rap because we think of it as conflict. And conflict is something that has a false dichotomy between those who are conflict adverse because they don't want to get into the emotional aspect of it, and then those who are conflict attractive and who are looking for a way to evoke that kind of reaction. And that's because what they're creating isn't actually conflict. It's more their superiority as a person. It's not really about the ideas. What I've told my daughters is that you can never actually create conflict. If someone tells you something and you know that it's not true and it's a personal attack, it doesn't really land. It is something that you just brush off because it has no ability to evoke emotions, particularly if that person has no actual power over you. But when you tell someone something and it creates an emotion, and you're not trying to create that emotion, you're not trying to make yourself better than them, you're just telling them your research, your ideas, and I know we have all had this experience in this forum. If that creates emotion, it's because there's already a conflict in that person's mind. There is a place for that to land. There is the fear in them that you're right. And that fear creates that emotional reaction. That's not your fault. It's not something that you can accommodate by not talking about the truth. And so I think that trying to figure out some way where we can take the emotion out of it would be helpful if we can do that. Step 1 in the productive argument: frame the question and get agreement on that question. So some of the things I've talked about before is an ethical statement can have no proper nouns. So however you frame that question, it should not include proper nouns. And then If you can, try to make it where there are 2 or more answers. It's open-ended. It's not a yes or no. There are no loaded terms in it where you are framing it in a way to win. You're framing it in a way to bring out the quest and say, here's the journey that we're going to go on. Second, more than even loving the person or respecting the person, make sure it's someone you like. Don't bother arguing with anyone who you don't like. Fix a cocktail, a blue martini. Give a foot massage while you're arguing. Arguing should be fun. Don't make it into a chore. Third is defining what does it matter. We use that question a lot to just dismiss someone as if that's a rhetorical question, but it's not. You need to know, what difference does this make? If it doesn't make a difference, other than proving you're smarter than somebody else, don't bother. And in particular, I think looking at what difference it makes to you. How would it change how you live? There are a lot of questions out there that I could be diving into, but I don't, because it wouldn't really change anything about what I do. So define that for you, and that will show why this is an important thing to delve into. Fourth is defining what you mean by every term in that question. Now, this isn't agreeing that this is the definition. All you're trying to do is communicate. But what's important is that I know what you mean by it, and that you know what I mean, so that if we have different terms for the same meaning, that's okay. We can translate, but we need to know, how do we talk about this concept? Number 5 is to expand the realm of possible answers. So this is just a creative exercise where you go through and say, okay, what logically could be true? And then we can narrow it down. But first, let's put it out there and say anything that would fit that could be true. 6 is determining what could change your mind. What are the kinds of evidence or facts or logic that could make a difference in this argument? 7, what counts as an authority in this argument? We are all the authority over our own thoughts and our own feelings and our experiences. No one else can tell what those are. We are the author of ourselves. But when we're looking at another authority, how do we decide how much credibility they get or don't get? I think that one thing you need to look at is a natural form of authority, which is how much time you've spent researching that particular question. So for instance, with Russell Brand, having done 50 episodes and listened to probably 200 hours of his talks and books and things like that, I have some authority on Russell Brand that other people who haven't done any of that research but have only listened to people talk about Russell Brand don't have. So that's a natural form of authority. With A Course in Miracles, having done at least a half hour of study of it a day for the last 20 years, that's 3,000 hours of study and possibly 6,000. So that's a form of authority that needs to be given more credibility than someone who has only heard about it or has only skimmed part of it. And then I think we need to look at outside authorities and their credibility. My scale for people like journalists is that I look at what do they risk, what do they lose by what it is that they've said, and what do they stand to gain by it, whether that's in money, in reputation, in career advancement. And if I've found one thing that is intentionally untrue, something that has been corrected, for instance, but they still continue with it, then I have to dismiss everything that they're saying as an authority. If someone is mistaken, if I just disagree with them, that's completely different. But if I know that they have lied, then they are no longer an authority. Number 8, own your dogma. Dogma is not a bad thing except when it is unacknowledged. If you don't know what your dogma is, you're going into an argument about something that you refuse to raise to question. So my dogma is that I am no better than anyone else, and I'm not going to get into an argument about whether people are equal or not, because I know that that's something I'm choosing to believe and that I refuse to raise to question. So if you have a dogma, you need to know it. And if the person you're arguing with has a dogma related to what you're arguing about, you have to know that you're never going to change your mind. You cannot kick someone else's dogma. Neferhotep has an article that I'll link to in the Substack where he says you should never use I am followed by a noun. That is a tell for a dogma, because what that says is that there's something out there that you identify with. And so no one can really argue that idea without you perceiving it as a personal attack. But that's not on them. That's on the fact that you've taken your identity and narrowed it down into this little proper noun. So I think that I am statements and I believe statements where you are saying, I accept this as a fact ahead of experience or logic, and I'm never going to raise that to question. Both of those should be ways of saying this is a dogma. 9, agree that you can point out when someone's violating the rules of engagement without giving offense, and that they can do that for you. This is something the Greeks had down to a fine art, because their audience was well versed in what the rhetorical fallacies were, the ways in which someone could win with a false argument. So they would call out from the audience when it was an ad hominem attack or something else where it seemed to me like Harry Potter saying Expelliarmus. That turns it into a game. And I think we should keep that element of fun in there, but also this is a lot of training to learn how to think and how to converse, how to think out loud, how to think in tandem without getting stuck in the ego. So being able to remind each other if we're going into something that is a character attack, that's not really about the idea, or something that is what I call throwing the book at it, and the Greeks called an appeal to authority. All of those are things that I think we can train each other in so that we can reach the end of our quest. And number 10, which may be the hardest, agree that you will continue to talk until you reach agreement. Doesn't mean you can't take bathroom breaks and order pizza. But this is something that is tough because we think that there has to be someone who wins and someone who loses. And so we don't want to put that pressure on someone coming to agreement. But in the end, if you're really talking about ideas and you're really evaluating them based on facts and logic, and ego has nothing to do with it, there's no reason that we shouldn't come to an agreement. So that's my wish for this new year, that you and I can have better arguments. And to follow up, I need to recommend we need to agree, not on the solution, but on the problem, the process, and the purpose. And this is polarization on Esther Perel and Yuval Noah Harari, and she gives some very interesting tips for relationship counseling and communication. Thank you for watching.